The First Descendant has done some things that I did not think they were actually going to do, and they addressed some of these things in the recent Q&A for the First Descendant. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this, starting off with the very first question that was asked, where the question was, let's start with the recent news. The update schedule was originally announced as 3 parts, but then changed to 2. Then the timeline was significantly moved up. Considering the development schedule, that couldn't have been easy. Are you guys okay? Now, just a little bit of touching on that. I know that some of you guys are obviously, maybe just gamers, but for those of you guys that at least understand the development aspect and how these things can affect teams, it is a lot when they make certain adjustments, just because if they have certain deadlines that they've set, they have to go through the ranks in order to get things adjusted and changed. And even sometimes moving one thing up can cause something else to fall off. So there's a lot that kind of goes into that. But they go to say we've gotten a lot of feedback saying that their update was too far off. So we knew we had to do something about it. The problem was that early October has quite a few holidays. Plus there's something like a company anniversary. So we weren't sure if we could make the schedule work. In the end, we just decided everyone would come into work. So this is what I'm saying. This is the stuff that I remember, when I used to play games like Gears of War, the families of the developers having to sacrifice the fact that their family member wasn't going to be there because they decided to go in on Christmas and develop and work on the game. And it seems like that's something that they're committing themselves to doing. So they continue to say, so far, no employees have objected with laughs. They seem to be hitting the like button out of habit, but I'm not sure if they really like it. Taking all that into account and ensuring the bare minimum survival of our staff, this is the fastest schedule we could come up with. So I think that we have to remember that developers are still people. And with that being the case, I think that for the work and the effort that they're putting in, the best we can do is giving constructive feedback and being, just lenient and waiting to see the response. I feel like so far they really have tried their best to address as many upfront and firsthand comments and contents that they've have issues with. So I feel like that's something that they really have been trying to exercise. So I'm just going into this super level-headed, and anytime I do see a problem, I try to present constructive feedback at most, so that, again, with things like this, understanding and being, realistic to the fact that they are still people. So that's at least just my take there. Now, the next question goes to say, it's been about 2 months since you launched the live service in early July. I imagine there have been a lot of internal changes during the preseason. Have there been any shifts in your development direction or operational policies, like how you handled OP characters or content structure design? So the first thing they talk about here is that let's talk about OP builds first. The strength of the OP builds that players are currently grinding out is within our expectations. However, the speed at which they're doing it is much faster than we anticipated. So this kind of goes into some of the grinds and maybe EXP things we're doing. It might not be expected or didn't expect that, because let's be real here. Some of those things are things that aren't by design being done. You know what I'm talking about when I say that. But either way, they go to say, however, before the service launch, we thought we only needed to worry about how the content would handle these powerful builds once we hit season 1. But we had to think about this since preseason. We've been constantly brainstorming what kind of content in season 1 can keep up with this. Also, the direction of builds was somewhat different from what we expected. We thought a wider variety of builds would be used, but ultimately builds that drastically increase damage output to skip patterns and reduce time became the norm. You could say the average user spec have skyrocketed towards offense rather than defense or utility. And this is also a thing that I think they'll understand more about most audiences in the space, is that people usually typically like to see bigger damage numbers. So when they're not seeing that a lot of times, that's something that kind of takes away from that dopamine effect. And that's really what it is. It's also about what can get things done the fastest. And if those big numbers lead to that X result, then people are tending to gravitate towards that, right? So you're going to have a lot of different variances when it comes down to that. But I think that on their part, if that's something that they don't want within the infrastructure of the game, what we have been seeing is they've been really counteracting that, and they've been emphasizing, for example, the gun builds, which you can get the job done, but it still requires you to like be in a cooperative setting and use some strategy, but it's still, something that is feasible considering that it's a team oriented game, I guess, if you were, saying that to be fair, right? Now, with that, they basically said, while we didn't predict this, looking at the situation, it was inevitable. Players always seek most efficient methods, so builds that allow for quick, repeated attempts naturally became efficient. This led to builds focused on extreme damage increase. As a result, our direction has shifted from various gimmicks and diversity to faster combat, more monsters, and more loot. Overall, we're moving towards eliminating gimmicks that forcibly take up time. For example, we've completely removed the mechanic of escorting while depleting shields from higher level infiltration operations, and we changed all the time-consuming capture zones to pure eliminations, which is great. So as they go to say, actually, in the early stages of development, we only had exterminations, and during internal testing, we added various types of gimmicks because it seemed like it would be more fun to have more mechanics. But now it feels like we've come full circle. Now, I will say, like, when you're grinding something repetitively, more mechanics is usually not necessarily the most fun. But again, it was something that I appreciate the fact that they tried to identify their own game. But of course, with the feedback, they're going to continue to, just sharpen their sword, which is good. It says this direction of change applies directly to the invasion mode introduced in season 1. While the invasion has puzzle gimmicks, it is designed so that if the gamers figure it out quickly, they can trigger an overload and progress without necessarily having to wait, which is great, right? Now, the next thing that they go to say, which is one of the big ones, probably one of the most important things that I feel like most of you guys actually care the most about, which I would even say this is the thing I care the most about, is the socket change. So it says, is the socket change being introduced in season 1 as a result of these considerations? Now they say, yes, that's right. As mentioned earlier, we hope players would rotate through various descendants, but realistically, there were far more attempts to concrete growth on one descendant and make them an all-rounder. However, currently, once you expand a socket, you can't change its type. So it's difficult to change the direction of your build, even using the preset function. It's also hard to attempt build changes because even if you use additional catalysts to change the socket types, you still have to level up again. So we're changing it so that once you apply a catalyst, you can freely change the socket types. This allows for more diverse attempts, and you can save these presets so you can switch to any build you need at any time. Now, this was the biggest thing because, again, this is what led to the whole one-shot gimmicks, and then people being stuck in those gimmicks and they're not feeling like they have fully built characters because they didn't, right? They weren't able to change them, especially with the time being consumed. I think that they have to look at and had to look at the average player and what time it would allot them to say, like, going from one build to another build. And like I've mentioned before in previous videos, this was taking up to about anywhere from like 3 to 4 resets that you would have to do on any build, especially if you're going from like a gun build to a skill build. When you're talking about, most skill builds typically run all 4 of these skill crit damage mods, and most gun builds, you're not really needing those necessarily. So that can completely leave you with just sockets that you couldn't do anything with. So it's nice that they have changed it, even from what they previously posted, which was that you would have the chance to change it to whatever socket type you've already catalyzed it to, which was basically like if we did Almandine, then you could do like, for example, you could go to like another one, right? That you changed it to. But now it looks like once you socket it, you'll be able to expand it or change it to whatever you want, which is huge because this will allow us to truly be able to make our builds efficient and then being able to swap them to different pages. I feel like because the money part that people were referring to, they're going to be getting that anyway. If you want more than one layout, you have to buy a whole nother preset page anyway. So that's just something that I feel like they're going to have more people doing because now more people can actually make the builds that they want without feeling like they have to speed up or expedite the process for the crystallization catalyst socketing. So I'm actually pretty happy that they did this. Now, moving on, the next thing that they go to say here, isn't the fundamental reason that it takes too long to max out a single descendant? If a descendant growth was faster, wouldn't we see more diverse use of descendants as you originally envisioned? And then they go to say, we didn't run in any in-game events during the preseason. Starting from season 1, we plan to boost growth externally through in-game events. And that was the biggest biggest thing we were missing. And I had a lot of you guys that actually played in the beta that said that they did run events in the first, like I would say, testing of the game. So this is hopefully something that we are truly going to see completely change how the game feels. And I think that that's another thing that with the preseason, some people really weren't appealed by it. And I think that that's one of the things and reasons was simply because they weren't getting the full experience of what season 1 is potentially going to be bringing. So they go to say, we plan to boost growth externally in game events, and we're also planning to overall update the experience point efficiency. I think growth speed will probably pick up compared to the preseason, which is great, right? Now, the next thing that they go to say, another thing I want to ask about is that there was very little motivation to play non-Ultimate Descendants. This was because the Ultimate Descendants were perfect upgrades to regular Descendants. How do you plan to motivate players to use regular Descendants? And this is really true. This is an issue we're considering pretty important and in need of an update. We intended for players to experience and use regular Descendants first before moving on to Ultimates, but since regular Descendants pale in comparison to Ultimates in the end game, most people didn't even bother with them and waited for the Ultimates, and that's very true. Like people that went for Valby, I was just saying, wait for Ultimate Valby. She's literally coming. Same thing with waiting for this next season. It was like, why build Freyna when Ultimate Freyna's coming? And then you get the extra additive of the new Transcendence, right? So it says we haven't decided exactly an exact method, but we're thinking of a system where growth in regular Descendants can be retroactively applied to transfer to Ultimate Descendants. That would be the best thing ever. If they literally change it to where we literally don't have to think about it, dude, we are eating good if that's the case. So I would be really hyped to see them do something like this. This would be game changing. Absolutely game changing. This would be huge. Now, the next thing, and we got a few more of these. So it says, imagine you got a lot of feedback about Reactor. Oh, I imagine, sorry, you got a lot of feedback about Reactor management. The difficulty of managing reactors was one reason why it was hard to switch between Descendants. Is there any planned improvements? So is that there aren't any Reactor related changes in this update, but we're having a pretty in-depth discussion about changing the Reactor system. It is an issue I noticed when I play the game too. Just find the Reactor I was using becomes a problem every time I switch Descendants. For now, we plan to let players categorize preferred items into 8 categories, making it easier to quickly find needed reactors. Now, I will say that is one of the biggest things is just spacing. The organization aspect of reactors is also very tedious. I think also too, the gun aspect, right? Like that's something that also is going to be a lot harder as we add more guns into the game. Your chances of finding the exact reactor with the exact stats is only going to get harder as the game prolongs. So they have to find a solution for that, because it's not like it's just something that just stays constant and is just, the way it is for farming, but it is going to be worse. Like just matter of a fact, like it just is. Like that just is a fact. It's going to get worse as they add different guns for each weapon type. And you're going to probably see that this season, especially if they keep things where it's in a pool of guns on the reactors versus it being like, hey, in this area, you have more of a chance to find the drop for the newest gun, right? So it all depends, on what they do for that. Now, it says later on, we're planning on to allowing players to expand the weapon types that meet the conditions through reactor enhancements. So instead of consistently farming reactors for each weapon you use, you'll be able to meet the conditions through enhancements as long as the additional options match. So that could work. We're also aware that farming reactors is a very grueling process. It's not just a repetitive content, but probably the most tedious part is examining and categorizing the options on each farmed reactor. So we're planning to introduce an additional random option filter to junk the filter. This means equipment without pre-specified options will automatically become junk with just one button press, which would be nice as well. Now, the next thing that they go to say here, I also want to ask about ultimate unique weapons. Except for a few weapons, their usefulness is very low. Besides new weapons being added, are there plans to improve existing low utility weapons? Now, they go to say, to be honest, I didn't think you believed me if I just said it, so I was planning to show results one by one later. But to tell you in advance, we're planning reworks and balancings for them all. That's huge. So all the weapons and Descendants currently deemed as useless will have their day in the sun someday. For season 1, major changes are planned for Ajax, Jaber, and Blair. Okay, so that's perfect because there are a lot of useless guns right now. And so again, hopefully like what we had happen with Greg's Reverse Fate, we'll see that happen with some of these other guns, which would be huge. Now, the next question that they have was, it was also pointed out that the shield factor in defense was very low utility. The current meta focuses on health and defense. In the extreme cases, even defense is ignored. Are there plans to increase the utility of shields? Isn't the shield important for descendants like Kyle? Now, they go to say here that I don't think the current meta will change just by improving modding. That's crucial, is that the content guides the player's patterns. There needs to be content where shields are necessary for shield-related research to naturally occur, and for shield-based modding to be created. I think the health meta has become dominant because we're not ready for that yet. As more content is added in the future, I think research on shields will naturally follow, which I think is, again, when they try to find more ways to counteract some of the things we're doing, shields going to end up being an implemented part of the equation, right? So then lastly here, it looks like the last question, I also want to ask about the balance between gunplay and power fantasy. Although all descendants have unique abilities, their utility varies greatly. For some descendants, it's better to just use gameplay without their abilities. What do you think about this? So I think the issue will also be mitigated as we add more content. For example, Lepic and Bunny are currently showing powerful performance. Lepic is strong as dealing massive damage, while Bunny excels at handling wide areas. On the other hand, it's true that descendants like Freyna, Blair, and Essimo don't have specialized uses in the current content structure. Once we provide content where these descendants are highly useful, research will naturally progress. I think time will come when players will fulfill their power fantasy by utilizing descendant skills in addition to simple gunplay. Now, I think that this, of course, goes into the whole idea that we basically have it to where right now the season's premiere descendants are these descendants. Like next season will probably be another set of descendants. And I think that so far for what we've gotten as a player base and as a community, we have gotten a massive overhaul of things that we want, which is huge, right? So I'm actually really excited because I think that this is going to be, this really does change a lot, right? This changes a lot in the game, and we can only expect to see more. I know some people are like, they want every little thing changed, and it's just realistically not going to happen. I will say, first and foremost, I will say coming from Nexon is doing an absolutely amazing job overall. Granted, there's a many of things that they can always work on, but I will say one of the things that they really have been doing fairly well is communicating. And I can't take that away from them. And I've worked with tons of companies, Tencent, Lilith Games. I've worked with, I'm trying to think of some off my head. Come to Us. Like any company you could think of, Nintendo, Square Enix, I've worked with them, and they really are doing some of the things that these major companies don't think of doing, and I wish they did more of. So it's really nice to see that they're taking the success and they're really trying to excel and give us more, just to be able to have enjoyment and get more out of the game for the time we're putting in. So again, guys, let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comment section down below. Everyone, stay blessed, and I can't wait to see you guys for season 1 because we got some amazing stuff coming into the game. So that's going to be that, guys. Everyone, take it easy, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.